wide selection of restaurants for your many cravings with Grab Food. Crave it, Grab Food.
Welcome back to Chinatown Museum's History Matters livestream. Today's show is entitled Eat, Walk, Talk with Ivan Mandi of Old Manila Walks. I'm Yuri Tamura, the museum officer and your host for the Saturday live streams. Food is more than just nourishment to the body. It is cultural heritage loaded with symbols and meanings from the past. Today, Ivan will be talking about Binondo's community history through the lens of food. Ivan Mandi is the man behind Old Manila Walks. He holds over 2 decades of experience working in the cultural field, which includes being a heritage activist, a school instructor, a features writer, a researcher, a tour operator, and just recently, a first-time book author. While in between jobs, Ivan found the time to complete his master's degree in cultural heritage studies from the University of Santo Tomas. He serves as a trustee for several cultural organizations and has received a cultural award by the municipal government of Manila. When not walking in Manila, he is out exploring the streets of the world. Ivan, welcome on to the show. Let's get walking.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Yuri, for that introduction. So for this afternoon, I'm gonna talk about our experiences on sharing our community's history through food with my talk entitled Eat, Walk, and Talk. So to begin with, okay. Okay, so to start with, I have a question for everyone. And I'd like to get a feel of what our viewers would think when we mention the word Binondo. Okay, so it's a very famous and historic neighborhood in Manila, and we all have our own impressions of what this place is all about. So here are the choices. So when you think of Binondo, do you think of it as a historical destination, or a shopping destination, or a culinary destination, or a party destination? So which of the four would you usually associate the neighborhood? History, shopping, food, or party? So please key in your answers. Okay, so to begin with, let me introduce to you Binondo. No, so I'm sure. Well, most of our viewers, a lot of our viewers, have been to this very storied district in Manila. We've had our experiences. You might not know it, but you probably, even if you thought you've never been to Binondo, you probably have been there. Because there are some places in Binondo which is part of Binondo, but most people do not really realize it's really part of the neighborhood. So here's a map of Manila, which was drawn in the year 1719. So that's around 300 years ago, and we have here Binondo in the map. And Binondo lies in the north of the Pasig River, okay? So which is the main natural artery of Manila, dividing Manila into the north and the south banks. The south bank would include the district of Intramuros, which is equally, if not probably more famous than Binondo. And just immediately after you cross the Pasig River to the north, you land on the district of Binondo. So as you can see, given the proximity of both districts, Binondo and Intramuros, these two places played a really important role in the history of Manila, and in a wider scheme of things in the history of the country. Okay, but of course, Intramuros being the political capital and religious capital, it probably has a little bit more edge than Binondo, which is largely tied to our economic history. Okay, so the impression that most people have of Binondo today is that it's Chinatown, and here is a 19th century photo of the main landmark of Binondo, which is the Binondo Church. And if you look at the people surrounding the church, you see a motley of communities living in Binondo. While Binondo today is largely known as Chinatown, it wasn't only the Chinese who lived in Binondo. It was actually a very multi-ethnic group that included, of course, the majority Tagalog community. We also had mixed communities, mestizos, meaning those born out of the intermarriages between Chinese and Tagalog. And we also had Europeans, in particular Spanish folks who live in Binondo. But of course, the bigger majority would probably be the Chinese, hence the association of Binondo as the Chinatown of Manila today. So here are some photos of historic characters who had something to do with Binondo. You know, when you talk about the history of Chinese migration in Manila, you don't just look at it in one stage, because the Chinese migration to our city happened in different stages in Manila's history. So in between the almost 450 years that Manila was our capital, we had different stages of Chinese migration who came here. So for example, there was a group that came in the 1750s. There's another group that came in the 1800s, in the 1850s, 1890s, 1900s, 1930s, 1940s, 50s, and so on and so forth. No? So what usually happened, if you look at the pattern of history, is that a lot of the immigrants who came earlier, at one point, they would probably have intermarried with the locals, and their descendants would have been assimilated, meaning at one point, the Chinese heritage sort of got diluted and eventually sometimes lost, no? I mean, the language facility. But that said, you know, at one point, there will be another wave of Chinese migration, another group of Chinese immigrants coming to Manila. So these photos show to you the different waves and patterns of Chinese migration to our city. You only have to look at what they're wearing, no? To show that some of the folks here came in the 1800s, some of the folks here came in the 20th century, no? Or 1930s, 1940s. So the history of Chinatown was basically shaped by that continuous pattern of Chinese migration to Manila. Okay, so today the iconic feature that you will think, what most people think of when they come to Binondo, would be this arc, this Chinatown Arc. Well, you see it in postcards. It was actually built in the 1970s during the time of the martial law. Now, it was built none other than by Imelda Marcos, and it's just one of the 4 arches that welcomes visitors to Binondo or to Chinatown. Okay. However, in 2015, well, our good mayor Era built this very controversial arc. No, it's a bit redundant because there's already an old arc, but there's a new one, which is today kind of like another landmark in Chinatown that you will see as you go down historic Jones Bridge. And this is the streetscape of Binondo today. It's a very organic district, no? Unlike Intramuros, which was designed to be in a grid pattern, meaning, you know, the streets were all laid out in right angles. Binondo was a little bit more organic. So the streets here are not in a grid pattern. You know, they actually do not have a very formal shape to it, no? And you see it's a neighborhood that's traditional and modern at the same time, no? Modern because you see a lot of new constructions going on, and traditional because you see a lot of the immigrant Chinese culture that was brought here by the ancestors years ago. Beliefs and foodways and those things. And of course, the traditional means of transport, which is the kalesa, still seen in Binondo. Well, the streets of Binondo, no, some of them are more famous than the others. Of course, people think of Ongpin, which is like the main street landmark, the most notable street. But of course, Ongpin is just one street of Binondo. There are a lot of historic streets in Chinatown, and without really realizing it, you see how the Chinese DNA, the Chinese imprint of that immigrant culture which was transported here, you see it as well in the street names. And most people do not really know, but some of the street names in Chinatown, apart from having the old Spanish names to it, the Chinese actually named them according to what they saw the street was before. Now, so these are not official names; these are community names that the old Chinese described certain streets. No, so for example, the street Rosario, which is today Quintin Paredes. Well, the Chinese in the old days they called it Jiuahua, which is kind of like a reference to an embankment because it's actually quite close to a canal. No, so you see how they named the streets as what they saw. There's a street in Binondo, Carvajal, which the Chinese referred to as Hang, or the Umbrella Alley, because supposedly a lot of the umbrella sellers were there during that time. So that's part of the community heritage that most people unfortunately do not see because they're intangible. That the street names are intangible, and we don't put them in our street signs as well. We have a lot of historic buildings in Binondo, commercial buildings, because Binondo, after all, was a commercial district. So you may be familiar with some of these buildings built by the banking industry, by the hardware industry, by the retail industry. Unfortunately, some of them are being demolished as I speak at the moment, like the Oysubin building. And we also have intangible heritage in Chinatown, like we have a Chinese opera. No, it's a dying art. It's a traditional Chinese opera, which is what we call in Hokkien as the Kao Ka, which is very elaborate with lots of makeup and high pitched singing. That is still practiced in temples, in certain temples in Binondo, but unfortunately it's a craft that is endangered because there's not much of interest among the young community. And we have wood carving, which is carving like those signages that you see in old Chinese shops, where they put their names. Again, since today very few people put wooden signages, this craft is also endangered of being lost. So Binondo is very, very rich heritage, so to put a profile of the neighborhood, an urban profile, I would describe Binondo to be, number one, it is a historic inner city district, meaning it's a place where which gave birth to a lot of things in Manila's history, and it's inner city because it's now part of a bigger metropolitan area. So similar to Intramuros, where the city started 450 years ago. And Binondo also has an urban ethnic culture, it being the historic area where the Chinese settled. They brought with them a lot of the cultures from the ancestral mainland, and that culture got transplanted here in Chinatown. So it has a very unique ethnic culture, which is similar but also different from the other neighborhoods in Manila. I mean, you only need to compare Intramuros with Binondo, and you will see that the traditional culture, of Binondo is very different from what they would have had in Intramuros, no? But you see, Intramuros, while the Spanish have left, the Chinese, well, some of them are still in Chinatown. It's an old market district. The biggest market in our city is in Binondo, which is Divisoria, and not many know that. No, not many people know that. That Divisoria is actually part of Binondo, and it's an old commercial center again with lots of banks and old businesses. So, given this profile, no, it has Binondo's with a rich culture. It has old architecture. It has history. Then you would think that it would have made or would have been promoted as a prime top tourist destination in Manila, such like Intramuros. But if you look at this graph, no, which was done by by a student, PhD student, who actually ranked the top tourist destination 10 years ago in 2010, and asked tourists, and what were the top tourist destinations in Metro Manila, you would see that Binondo didn't make it into the top 5, or Chinatown. No, Intramuros is a given because it's promoted everywhere. When you land at the airport, you will see brochures of Manila, and they will say that you have to go to to Intramuros. You have to go to Rizal Park, no? You have to go to the malls and Port Santiago. But not many would say that you want to visit Chinatown for its rich culture. So there, and given that, okay, it made me realize that what, the heritage of my neighborhood of Chinatown could be more, no. And one way to really to promote that community heritage is through tourism. So let me tell you something about my family's history. So this is a photo of my grandfather. His name is D. Hauchap, and he was immigrant to Manila. He came here in 1935, which was the time of Quezon, Manuel Quezon, Commonwealth period. This is his wedding photograph, which was taken in Binondo Church in 1942. So before the church was destroyed during World War II. So when he came here, married my grandmother, and eventually had a family. So my parents were born here, and eventually descendants. Like I was born here, and he lived in Binondo all his life. From the time he came here until the time he died, he actually died in Binondo as well. No, so he never left. As for our family, I lived there for 8 years of my life. My dad grew up in Binondo, but after in my 8th year of existence, we moved out of Chinatown and moved to a neighboring district. But for some reason, Binondo, even if we moved out, Binondo was still part of our system. It really didn't leave our system because we always had a reason to go back to Chinatown, if anything, to visit the old folks, the grandparents, the uncles, the aunties, no? On top of that, you had business transactions in Chinatown. You bought your food there, you bought your hopia there. So physically, we didn't live there, but the culture of that immigrant culture that was transplanted, it was with us. So I grew up with that, and I appreciated that. No, not many people appreciate their own culture, but I grew up appreciating the streets of Chinatown, running on the streets, looking at the old houses. And eventually, I started my career in the cultural tourism field by becoming a volunteer museum guide. And this is in Bahay Chinoy Museum, Intramuros. This is kind of like the big brother of Chinatown Museum in Binondo. Now, because they've been around since 1999. So I did volunteer work for Bahay Chinoy for about 10 years, talking about telling the history of our community in a very museum format because it's a museum. But one day I realized, okay, doing museum tours is nice. It's very meaningful, but compared with Binondo, Bahay Chinoy is a very curated museum. No, then I realized that what, a bigger museum is actually Binondo itself. So when I started doing, after I did museum tours, I ventured onto doing city tours, cultural tours, no? And one of my biggest museums, well, Manila is basically a big museum, but one of the parts of Manila, which I could definitely say I'm very familiar with, was Chinatown, having grown up there for 8 years. Now, so I had this bright idea of making a cultural tour of Chinatown, and that started in the early 2000s. No, we started doing architectural tours of Chinatown. I got involved with the with the conservation group now, but I found out along the way that doing cultural tours is fine, doing architectural tours is fine, but that's not enough to get a lot of people to Chinatown. Because as much as I love heritage and architecture, well, it wasn't for everyone. And not everyone could actually stand walking for 2 hours straight just to look at buildings. No? So we had sort of had to tweak our tour and integrate some things which we thought would make our tours more interesting and telling the heritage of our community to the bigger society in a more enticing and a more fun manner. And that's when we thought of integrating, food. Okay. And so in 2005, this tour, which is part of the series of the tours that we have in Old Manila Walks, it's called the Big Binondo Food Walk, was born. And was the first, I think it's the first commercially available tour that, or food tour that, Binondo ever had. Because prior to this, nobody really did cultural food tours in Chinatown. Now, what this is, to most people's mind, is basically a fun food tour. But for us, the way we see the Binondo Food Walk, it's actually not just a regular food tour. We always like to say it's a historical, it's a cultural, and a community food tour, because the inspiration of this tour and the content and the what we're discussing about this tour is really related to the history of our community. So it's not just restaurant hopping from point A to point B. It's feeding your stomach as it is feeding your minds. Okay, because we wanted to share the history of our community. No? And that's the whole inspiration about with the Big Binondo Food Walk, which became a very iconic tour in our tour program. So we had to do some write-ups. We had to make it, interesting and enticing for people to come down to Chinatown and experience Binondo through its heritage through food. Okay, so this is the write-up for our brochure. And so as you can see, it takes a lot of inspirations from the heritage of the community. So you have this guy carrying a pinga, no, which is how the old Chinese would have peddled their goods in the 1800s, no, when they sold taho or when they sold pancit on the street. So let's move on to food. But before we do that, I'd like to ask everyone again. We talk about food. What are Chinese food is very, very diverse. In fact, I don't even know all of them. It's probably too much to know all of them. But we all have our impressions and memories of eating Chinese, because Chinese food, dare I say, is probably one of Manila's unofficial cuisines. No, so what are the type of what are certain Chinese eats that you like to eat? No, is it siomai? Mm-hmm. Or sweet and sour pork? or a beef mami, or this thing called kiampeng. Okay, so these are just random choices. There's just really more to that. And these are probably the things that some people might be more familiar with.
Ivan, so regarding your first poll, the results are out. So 54%.
All right.
15% shopping and 0% party. Sadly.
Sorry, can you share that again? 50.
54% culinary destination,
Okay.
31% historical destination, 15% shopping destination, and 0% party. Very, very sad for the party.
Actually, here's the thing, no? That's why I put the party there. I kind of expected the answer to be like that without realizing that, Escolta is actually part of Binondo. And if you're familiar, if you've attended an Escolta block party in the last 5 years, then that is actually partying technically in Binondo because Escolta is part of Binondo. No, so but surprisingly, people don't associate it with partying, but Escolta is actually part of Binondo. Okay, so thanks for that, Yuri. Anyway, so these are the choices. Okay, so let's talk about the food that we have in Binondo. No, Binondo is probably one of the most high density food destinations in the metropolis. Okay, and why do I say that? Because we actually did an unofficial count of the food establishments in Chinatown, and there's a lot. No, there's a lot. There's close to more than 300 food establishments. Like in Lucky Chinatown alone, how many restaurants do you have? A lot, no? And that's not including the mom and pop which you see on the on the streets of Binondo. How many restaurants do you have in Lucky Chinatown, Yuri?
I'm not so sure, but I feel like this is a good time to segue that we have a promo for our watchers for today. So you can get 100 pesos off your Grab food order from selected ground floor Lucky Chinatown restaurants for a minimum purchase of 800. So yeah, minimum purchase of 800. So anyways, our poll results are out. Ivan, are you ready
Yes.
to know what the Chinese like to eat?
Not the Chinese, it's anyone, really.
Okay. Which Chinese eat do you like to eat? Okay, so we have 63% siomai, 13% sweet and sour pork,
Okay.
22% beef mami, and 3% kiampeng.
Okay, I sort of expected the answer to be like that as well, and it sort of proves one point that I'll be making in a while. No, number one, siomai garnered the biggest vote because siomai is the most famous. It's the easiest to eat for one. You can find it not even outside Chinatown. You can find it around every little shop, perhaps in Manila or even in other cities around the country. No, but kiampeng is a very unique dish that for some reason is only largely found in Chinatown. Now, so if you talk about the food heritage of Binondo, of course it's Chinatown. So a lot of it is Chinese inspired food. Although I must emphasize, it's not just Chinese food that you have in Binondo. You also have non-Chinese foods, no, like the typical carinderia type menu, no. But of course, as tourists, most people would probably go there to sample, the Chinese dishes, no. Now, if you look at this map, you'll notice that the bulk of the Chinese immigrants who came to Manila, including my angkong or my lolo, came from this province called Fujian province. It's a good around probably 90% of the Chinese immigrants. So, if you have a Chinese, a Chinoy friend whose family name is Chuang, Lim, Ong, Tan, Gong, if you scratch their ancestry, you'll probably trace it to Fujian province. No? So historically, that was the area which which the bulk of our Chinese immigrants in Manila came from. The remaining, however, about the 10% of the Chinese immigrants came from the province beside Fujian, which is Guangdong province. Now, Guangdong province in the old days was called as Canton, hence the dish pancit Canton, okay, because that was the old Western name of Guangdong. So about 10% of the Chinese immigrants who came were from Guangdong region. No? So we didn't have the whole of the Chinese mainland, coming to Manila. It was really just historically two specific areas in southern China, no? Which is Guangdong and Fujian province. And that reflected on the food culture that they brought to Manila. So we have here a selection of certain sort of iconic dishes within the community, that traces their origins to Fujian province. Some of this might look familiar to some might not look familiar, but if you're Chinoy, you probably grew up eating some of these dishes, okay? And in the food scheme of things, the Hokkien style of cooking wasn't as fancy as the Cantonese style, no? Which is why the food of the dominant Chinese ethnic group here, the Hokkiens, it wasn't as popular as, say, the Cantonese, no? Because the Cantonese, they were masters in showmanship when it came to food, no? So these restaurants were largely food was lutong bahay for us Chinoys. No? Some restaurants serve them, but they're very community centered food. Okay, so there, and then you have the other type of cooking, which is the more popular Cantonese style of cooking, and you see a lot of your ideas of what Chinese food is actually Cantonese. No? So if you look at the poll, a big percentage mentions siomai. And siomai is really part of the whole dim sum repertoire, which is essentially a Cantonese invention. Sweet and sour pork was also Cantonese, beef mami or beef wonton, mami, these are all Cantonese fare. To put a local context, I guess it's like saying Hokkien was kind of like Ilocano cooking, and then Cantonese was like Kapampangan cooking, no? And between the two, Kapampangan cooking is largely, well, it's really more fancy, it's really more elaborate, as compared with the humbler Ilocano way of doing things. That's how I would compare both styles. Okay. And of course, over the last decades, we still have immigrants, not just from Fujian and Canton. Of late, we've had immigrants from other regions of China, even as far as the north, where historically we did not really get any immigrants. Who again, they brought with them dishes from where they came from, and when they opened shops in Chinatown, so they sort of enriched the offerings that we have in Binondo. So these are some of the older establishments that are still in Binondo. Some of them are over 100 years now. And you see, for the longest time, these establishments were largely community-centric, meaning those who patronized these restaurants were largely from within our community only. No? It's because they didn't really market themselves, and the idea of going to Chinatown at the time just to eat was non-existent to most people. No, but that said, a lot of these restaurants have been there forever. They have interesting stories to tell. They have their own subculture, and they have their own way of doing things. No, and it's this narrative, this heritage that we try to express in our Binondo food walk. No? So it wasn't just about eating a fried chicken or eating an oyster omelette. We tried to dig in the stories of how these restaurants started, what's the inspiration behind their noodle, no, and that basically made up the experience of the Binondo food walk. No, so it was feeding your stomach as it was feeding your minds and making you or introducing you to the rich community stories of Chinatown. So started in 2005, no, and initially we had to have some gimmicks. So I had to wear a Chinese immigrant inspired costume, but eventually we ditched that as as we grew older, and so we had a uniform. So we've been in operation for 15 years now, since 2005. A lot of the participants who have joined our tours are locals, which is we're very happy with that, because locals. I mean, it's telling the story of an ethnic community. No, we probably have Chinese friends, but we don't really learn about their heritage because they themselves do not share it or do not talk about it. So this is one way for people to understand the Binondo Chinese community, which is a very, very integral, but mostly misunderstood ethnic group in Manila. Okay. So apart from doing regular food tours for tourists, eventually we had to be more creative in running our tours. So from just tourists, we also did corporate tours. No? So like our tours, our Binondo Food Walk became a venue for team buildings. No, the companies would come to Binondo just to join our tours and have fun, have some community, have some company camaraderie. At the same time, learning about the heritage of our community. So yeah, and this type of phenomenon didn't really exist until we started the Binondo Food Walk, because no company would when you think of team building, you think of beaches or resorts, right? You don't think of going to Binondo. But through our tours, we gave companies a reason to come to Chinatown, a reason to experience something similar yet something different, no? And it proved to be a very good idea because most people had fun. We had tour collaborations as well. Now we had creative events. We have we had product launches. So our tours became our food tour became a venue for a lot of these creative experiences. Now with tour collaborations with with companies and products. In time, we saw Binondo becoming a school trip destination. Now, so here we have a photo of a group of students from Cagayan de Oro who were doing a culinary tour of Manila and the environs of Pampanga, and part of the experience of their lesson. This is a school. This is a university. Was that they came to Binondo and to experience our Binondo food walk. No, because if you're coming from Cagayan de Oro, this is probably something different for you. We did school tours for kids as well. No, not just university, like little kids. Again, tying up our advocacy of sharing food and heritage and history, and wrapping them together like this lumpia, which this little child never actually tried before. So in time, the Department of Tourism, they came up with a program called Bulimaria Food Trips in 2014, where basically they were trying to promote food tourism in the following areas around the country, different provinces. Just to sort of toot more of our horns a bit now. But if you look at the program that the DOT came up, a lot of it is provincial destinations, Iloilo, Pampanga, Batangas. But you have here the Binondo Food Walk, and we're proud to say that Binondo was the only entity in the Culinaria food trips of DOT, which wasn't a provincial destination. It was actually a neighborhood, no, not a province. So that's how I guess how far-reaching the Binondo Food Walk tour that we did had to be noticed by the country's tourism department. And eventually, we had people from regular tourists to famous people, even the Secretary of Tourism herself, coming to Binondo just to experience what we have in the neighborhood. And that sort of propelled Binondo as a food destination within Manila. No? So in time, we saw we saw a very big increase of tourists coming to Binondo just to just to explore the neighborhood and just to eat. No, I don't have the statistics of it, but I'm pretty sure that tourism has definitely increased in the last 10 years or so. Now that people came to Binondo to explore our neighborhood and just try out the local food offerings, even if they did not join our tours. So yeah, our tours became venues for family events. No, like this one is a birthday party. It's a 40th birthday party. So instead of doing a restaurant party, they just booked our tour, and we made sure that they had fun. Complete with theatrical trappings like lion dances and whatnot. No, so it's very memorable. This is before COVID. One of the last tours we did before the lockdown in March 15. Oh, and our tours also became venues for wedding proposals as well. Now, this is one of the more memorable tours. Where at the end of the tour, the guy proposed to a girl, and was happy ending. So to complement our tours, and because not all people could join our tours, we came up with a map version of the tour, which we give out to people. It's a very well-researched map of Chinatown that is given as part of the Binondo food tour, the Binondo food walk experience, no? So that if you want to come back on your own after visiting, then you can explore it on yourself. It's a very detailed map of what to see, what to eat, and what to try in Chinatown. Unfortunately, before before the full crazy COVID-19 craziness happened, there was a lot of anti-Chinese race bashing now because of the Wuhan where it came from. So to help just before the lockdown, we tried to organize the community in our own little way to sort of help combat this stereotyping, this race bashing, because it was already affecting a lot of the businesses in the community. So we partnered with friends from the team from the design outfit team Manila to create a poster to tell the people that, hey, you know what, this COVID-19 thing. I mean, it's a virus, it's a problem, but that's not a reason to blame everything to the Chinese, right? And so we came up with a poster to again promote Chinatown in the midst of this impending crisis. And then March 15 happened. And so since March 15, we have not been operating the Binondo Food Walk as we used to. So we're kind of affected too, and so are the businesses in Chinatown. How this will end, we are not sure yet, but we're hoping and we're optimistic that when everything is better, that people will come back to our Binondo, visit our restaurants, visit our museums, walk our streets, and just have a nice, good time eating your way through Chinatown. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that, Ivan. So there are quite a few people in the comments asking where can they get in touch with you. So can you please give us your contact details?
We have our website. It's oldmanilawalks.com. It's right there on the screen. And we also have Facebook, Old Manila Walks. Facebook.
If you'd like to get in touch with Ivan, please go to Old Manila Walks on Facebook and their own website, Old Manila Walks. So yeah, at this point of the talk, we would like to entertain questions if there are any for Ivan. So has there been something that you'd want Ivan to expound on? Do you have any questions for him about his work or more on Binondo's history? Please ask it on the comment section down below. So Ivan, but you said you had you do also tours for kids. So
Yes.
how do you explain Binondo's history to them? Because I'm assuming that you would have to explain it differently as you would to an adult.
Yeah, we've done lots of school tours in Binondo. One of the things that that happened when we started doing our tours is that we suddenly had school trips going to Chinatown, no? So prior to our tours, when you have a school trip, you didn't go to Binondo. You went to Intramuros, you went to Port Santiago, or you probably went to eat Bulaga after. But when we did our tours, and our tours are designed, it's a very flexible program because we have an adult program, we have an academic program, and we also have a kiddie program. No, so usually with kiddie tours, it's aligned with a particular topic or subject that they are discussing for that period. No, a lot of our tours for kids have actually been linked with their lessons on migration. No, but using the Chinese experience in Manila as a topic that they could understand. No, what are the reasons for migrating? This and that. That said, we've also done tours for higher learning, like universities and even doctoral programs. No, so it's something that we play around with and something that we like doing because it challenges us to think of different ways of interpreting community heritage to different sets of people.
Okay, we have some questions coming in. How can we attract visitors, foreigners, to visit Binondo during this pandemic? So yeah, I don't know, Ivan.
It's a tough question. Well, the stores are actually open. Most of the stores are now in Chinatown are now open. I think that question is answerable not just for Binondo, but generally in every tourism destination that we have in the country. No, I mean, how do we attract people to go back? Well, we have to make them feel secure. Number one, and unless we get over this whole pandemic fear, then no matter how much cleaning we do in Chinatown, how much scrubbing of the streets, if there's that fear because the government has not handled this crisis well, then people will not go out and people will not come to Binondo. No, and that's just not for Binondo, but that's practically for every tourism destination around the country.
Okay, so we have another question. Do we still import food ingredients from the mainland? I think this is also cause of fear and misconceptions.
Unfortunately, yeah, that there's that part, but yeah, we still do import, and I don't see any reason for that because there are some ingredients that we don't really make here. So again, it's a very hard question to answer. That's probably answerable by the Food and Drug Administration. But whatever comes in import should be up to the standards of that we have. No, but I wish that people would be more discerning when they think of when they think about these things, because it's so easy to blame. Because it's Chinese, it's from China, it's from Taiwan, then we have to fear it. No, so I would rather be more informed, no, and you make your decisions not based on fear and race, but if you think it's unsafe, you try reading the label of the of the food. If you think it's unsafe, then don't buy it. No, but a little bit more open-mindedness than just blind fear.
Okay, an interesting question about, I guess, the types of tours you might be coming up with. Any plans to have a separate tour introducing participants to other Chinese cooking styles, maybe like an all Sichuan kind
Ah,
of food tour?
Good question. None yet for now. uh, but because you don't like, for example, Sichuan style is not a very common type of Chinese food
Yeah,
we have in Manila.
yeah,
Generally, because a lot of people are not are versed to super spicy stuff.
yeah,
It's only specialized restaurants, which is why we came up with the map, right? Because the map that we give out in the tour, the idea of that map is that once you join our tour, once you understand a little bit of the history, you get a bearing of the place, then you can come back on your own. And if you're feeling more adventurous, then you can probably come back to Binondo and try out the other restaurants which are not part of the regular program. Our tours do not eat at every restaurant in Binondo because we cannot do that. It's only a selected few within the route of the tour. And that said, no, I should say it's not just in Binondo where you can get good Chinese food, right? Good local Chinese food. You can get it in
yeah.
the other Chinatowns in the metro, like Banawe or Wilson Street in Green Hills. No, so and it just shows to you that it's one of Manila's Metro Manila's probably unofficial cuisines that everybody likes to eat.
Yeah. Okay, another question. What makes Chinatown unique to other heritage sites nearby?
A good question. Okay. Well, the very let's compare Chinatown, let's say, with Quiapo or Intramuros, no. And for most people, the idea of Intramuros as being the Spanish colonial um, heritage district. So you see a lot of the imprints of Spanish colonialism in Manila's history. The curious thing about Intramuros is that you see the churches, you see the forts, you see the cathedrals, you see the streets, but there's really no local Spanish community as to speak of. Diba? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see, people there speak Spanish. I mean, the monuments are there, the walls are there, the fort is there, but there's no living heritage. As compared with Binondo, okay? Binondo would have heritage buildings as well. We have a church, we have buildings from the 19th, 20th century. But at the same time, we still have the historic community living in Chinatown. No, a lot of them may have moved out already, but there's still substantial number left, and we are getting new immigrants. And we still get new immigrants as I speak.
Yeah.
In those in 168, now those in the Disorder Mall, they are part of the pattern of migration that Binondo has been having for the last 450 years. The same with Quiapo, no? Quiapo is beside Binondo. It's also a historic district. But Quiapo also has a very strong immigrant community. I'm not sure if people are familiar, but the immigrants to Quiapo were not from China. They were from Mindanao. No, they were Maranao communities, Tausug communities, and they also brought with them their food, which is very good and very good now that people are slowly discovering. People go to Quiapo not just for the Nazareno, but they go there to buy Maranao specialties now. But of course, they had to do a lot with their surroundings just to entice more people. So you see, these neighborhoods, they have their little interesting ethnic quirks to it, and that's what makes Binondo different from Intramuros or say Quiapo. Different and similar, same time.
Yeah. Okay, so one last final question before we close out. We're running out of time. Hi, we're doing a research on merienda in Filipino culture, and pancit is at the top of our survey for their favorite merienda. What can you say about Chinese food as a reflection of Filipino merienda culture?
Um, well, I guess certain Chinese dishes have sort of been integrated to the concept of eating merienda. We may not necessarily think of them as Chinese, but if you look at the history, I mean, they're obvious of Chinese origin. Like apart from pancit, no, maybe xiao is another classic merienda that we have. And xiao was originally just asado, but now we have many types of xiao which were born out of the original from asado to bola bola. We now have, I think, chicken xiao. We now have, different types of xiao. So, I mean, the culture of merienda is there. It's just the food that's part of the merienda, which is continuously evolving. No? So from pancit, we now have siopaw, but now we can have macaroons for merienda, right? For and macaroons, they're totally not Chinese at all. They're like French or or ensamada was Spanish, right? So it's I guess it's all about accepting and serving what people like to eat.
Okay, for the person who asked this question, I think I also have an answer. So, a lot of Chinese food has entered our merienda culture because it's accessible. It's not expensive. We accept it as everyday food, and the ingredients are easy to find. So that says a lot about how Chinese food came into Filipino culture. It's through immigrants who are, laborers, who are ordinary people. These are not people who came here to conquer, but people who came here to make a living and, to be part of the working. So that's why a lot of the Chinese food in Filipino culture is accepted at the base level, and it's very accessible. It's because it came through the masses that we're moving here. So I think we will have more on this topic next week with our talk with Feliz Santa Maria. So Ivan, do you have any last words to close us out before I go back to my ending spiel?
Well, I hope everyone's healthy and well. Those joining us now, but there are a lot of things going on right now with this whole pandemic thing. From a health issue becoming political issue as well, no, and becoming ethnic issue, no. But I always think that as a ethnic minority, we have to reach out to the bigger society for them to understand our community better, no. And one way to do that is to invite people, no, to listen to your stories, your narratives, your heritage, and what better way to discuss these things over nice food, diba? Over a nice merienda, no? So we talk, we learn from each other, we have fun, and by doing that, we understand each other better, and we probably will have less ethnic biases and less ethnic racial bashing, no, when times get tough, no. Nothing that cannot be discussed with food and heritage.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. So yeah, if you like our show, you can check out our other live streams on our YouTube channel called Museums Matter. So if you find this educational, please go to YouTube and catch our other live streams on our channel called Museums Matter. Next week, we will be having a talk on what kids should know about Filipino food with food historian and book author Feliz Santa Maria in partnership with Adarna Books. So what makes Filipino food Filipino? So today we learned about, what makes Binondo food Chinese, how Chinese culture kind of influences Binondo food. But next week we'll be tackling, what makes Binondo food and other types of food Filipino. So learn more about the history and heritage of our food with Tita Feliz at 2 p.m. next Saturday. Bring your kids along with you. We promise that it's kid friendly. So yeah, thank you again. If you like our content, please go to Museums Matters and see you next week on Saturday at 2 p.m. Goodbye!
Get a wide selection of restaurants for your many cravings with Grab Food. Crave it, grab it, Grab Food.